All right, no time like the present, right? I'm Andrew. I'm the Dream Hunter, and I'm here again to continue this disclosure about how spirit came into my life, and it's hard to talk about because there's no idea involved, and any ideas that I use are not it, and yet I have this experience. So I'm going to try and just tell you the story and what happened and what I felt, whatever insight that I've gained, and then leave you to decide for yourself how that filters into your process. So yesterday I talked about manifestations of the spirit. That's the first one. And again, this is all coming from Carlos Castaneda's book, Power of Silence. You know, these patterns in terms of what happens in your development of spiritual process. And I'm using spiritual process now. These are my words because Carlos's system took me to various points, and I needed other perspectives to help me get through certain aspects of it. So what I'm offering to you is my synthesized view, my integrated totality of self-being that is my spiritual process, and that is my insight, which is not a finished or fixed state, but a continually evolving process. So, manifestations of the spirit. One thing I didn't mention yesterday was my experiences with the psychedelics. And it's perfect that I left those yesterday out because they lead into today's story. and this one is the knock of the spirit. The knock of the spirit is when spirit first makes you aware of its presence. Manifestations of the spirit, as I experienced that, was coincidences and strange happenings and things leading me outside of my conditioning, but never enough to create a new continuity. The old continuity of the conditioned response was way too strong. So the manifestations were not enough. All of the things that I learned in the manifestations of spirit in my life, like, you know, my friend, Semi-Pro, and Journey to Ixtlan, Carlos Castaneda's teachings, other spiritual presences who came into my life, J. Krishnamurti, Gandhi, through their books, always through books, right? Like because of my schismatic existence, you know, I could never actually get in with a teacher or go somewhere to meet like-minded people. I was always isolated in my little private world, which I'm going to elaborate on today. But knock of the spirit is when you start to get aware that something else is happening. This one I call, the knock of the spirit is Carlos's phrasing, but I'm also calling it what the beads said. These beads. See these beads? I put them on. I'm starting to put them on more and more. Sometimes maybe you hear them rattling in the background because they're integral to what happened for me, right? So allow me to begin. I was doing a lot of psychedelics, eating a lot of mushrooms through my 20s, and they came to me organically, like without any planning on my part. This is manifestations of the spirit. Suddenly a guy I was working with at this restaurant, it was called the Georgian Dragon. We worked in the kitchen, and all sorts of interesting coincidences amongst those guys and myself. But this one guy, he lived across the street, upstairs in this like low income dive apartment. It was in this place called Fernwood in Victoria. And in the 90s, Fernwood was a rundown, like ghetto type of area. It's since been refurbished and gentrified, and it's very different now. In the 90s, it was not that. So anyway, after work, we'd finish, it was a pub. So, we'd get off work at like 1 a.m. or something like that. We'd go across to his place and, smoke some pot or hang out, talk about things, philosophize. He was in university at the time. I wasn't yet. Anyway, long story. And he's an interesting character in himself. But I'll leave him to possibly another post. But he's the one who introduced me to the mushrooms, and so we eat mushrooms together, and it was always a very magical and mystical experience, of course. And through my 20s, I kept on having that experience. And the thing was, of course, I was totally schismatic. You know what I mean? I had this brutalized conditioned response. My spirit had been broken. I wasn't defeated utterly, but I lived a wasteland life that was coming from the inner wasteland that childhood brutalization had created in me. And all that was good and right and energetic and loving in me was like a little fantasy, a little secret, shameful fantasy that I had that I could never share with anyone, really. But that I shared unconsciously when I was playing music, but had no awareness of it. Music is also another theme, because music it's the thing where spirit was able to reach me. It was through music. So as I got toward my late 20s, the problem that I had then is that, and now I said it yesterday when I talked about like the metaphor of the indigenous North American Aboriginal sorcerer, right? Like it became a metaphor, or rather, it is metaphoric, you know, like, because what I mean is like, you know, a European living in Victoria, European descendant, colonial, you know, settler type of person, right? Like, where was I going to have that experience? You know, I was not gifted with that unusual experience that Carlos Castaneda had. And at the time, I was too broken and stuck inside to ever, like, you know, take a trip down to Arizona or New Mexico, or even Mexico for that matter. You know what I mean? I was just in my own little world here, you know, my own little wasteland that I was living, and lost and confused. But the enlightening experience of the psychedelic started to become an escapism, like everything else. So that rather than it breaking the continuity and leading me to a new continuity, I looked at the way that the psychedelic affects your perception, breaks the continuity of your conditioned response. That's why it's so good in treating depression, right? It breaks the continuity. You see something different. And if you have the right people around you in the right therapeutic context, you can see that new continuity is yours to create. And that's the liberation of it, right? But for me, in my 20s, the experience became me trying to fit myself into this fantasy image. You know, I began to eat the mushrooms too much because I was trying to be like Don Juan. Rather than using the lesson to be who I am, I was trying to be them. That escapism, escape myself, right? Because I could not synthesize my perception into my daily life. It was like, nope, it doesn't exist. Fantasy, drug experience. You know, I didn't have these rational thoughts. I was a very unconscious person at the time. But looking back now, that's what I would say to that young man. I'd be like, dude, just relax. But I couldn't. I had no teachers. I had no peers either, for that matter. No one. I mean, I had a friend who was practicing with me, but he ended up being a different kind of person. Anyway, toward my late 20s, you know, moved to Vancouver. I met the Threshold Guardian, who is a major petty tyrant in my life in terms of someone who's like actively destroying whatever growth I was trying to perceive, and actively trying to co-opt me into the dark spell. You know, there's the zombies who are just the blind followers, but then there are the vendors of the dark pattern, and he was a vendor of the dark pattern. He'd converted all of that harshness and negativeness into aggressive, destructive, abusive patterns. You know, I was the same way, but I was an introvert, so I treated myself that way. And when it came to the outer world, I couldn't engage because I thought I was too terrible and awful, and all the terribleness and awfulness I would inflict on myself in a self-destructive inner weirdness, right? Whereas he had converted it into, you know, profiteering capitalism. Anyway, it was during that time I was doing an excessive amount of psychedelic mushrooms, you know, in my late 20s, into my late 20s, and just into 30. You know, 2000 to 2001 is this time frame I'm talking about here. And I'm living in Vancouver, working in this bad business, which many years later was revealed to me to be mail fraud. And at the time, there was lawyers there. I lived in a world of justifications. I truly didn't have any kind of conscious grip on what I was doing, except that it was dark, and this dark figure, being the liar, I was in this kind of duel with him in a weird sort of way. But my life began to collapse around me because I was defeated, because there is no defeating dark process with dark process. All it did was reinforce all the worst ideas about myself, right? But spirit, of course, I mean, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, spirit knocked on my door. And what began to happen was I began to hear things. And so how it manifests is I began to hear like patterns, like sound vibrational patterns in the environment around me. And it seemed to be coming towards me. And it was partnered with a realization I made one time. I actually mentioned this a couple of times ago. I was talking about how this one moment in Carlos Castaneda, can't remember which book it was, and Don Juan's having a laugh at Carlos because Carlos doesn't want to drink the water, he doesn't want to eat any food because he's afraid of getting diarrhea, right? And so for Carlos, diarrhea is like, keep the things from coming inside me because, diarrhea, I don't want to have diarrhea in my intestines, inside him. And Don Juan's like, you're so careful, like you're going to make all these preparations so you can escape diarrhea. Like diarrhea is hunting you out there in the world, like in the world of nature there. And for some reason, because spirit was knocking at my door at that time and all the things that I was doing, because I was beckoning to the experience, even though in my conditioned response, I was blind and ignorant to what I was doing, that fantasy part of myself, which was fantasy in my conscious idiot delusions, right? That was the true part of me seeking and asking for help in the only way that it could. It was in this excessive and escapist practice, right? So that insight came about, diarrhea stalking you, right? Like outside. Suddenly, I had the insight of much of what Don Juan was teaching Carlos about the old seers, which is everything was outside of us. There was no inner world for the old seers. The new seers were all about conquering the inner domain, and they didn't care about the outside domain. They were concerned with the inner domain, cleaning out the self-importance, finding the path of heart, which I understand. I mean, self-importance is the biggest demon in the world, but getting to the path of heart is that loving, healing, evolving dreaming. That's my synthesis. It's taken many years for me to come to it. At the time, it blew my mind to consider the reality of, like, the spiritual reality of a world of entities out there. Because at the time I was totally self-absorbed, totally living in my wasteland. I guess ultimately blighted materialism was a quality of it, like just gross, shameful. I mean, I felt shameful and awful. I felt gross. So the world was therefore shameful and gross. It was like a materialist, and it was a despairing viewpoint that was renewed by the inner fantasy that I didn't share with anyone, right? And so because that was all an inward process, I didn't even really get to the game of the outer world, right? This was a moment where that got shocked. Like, what? Oh my God, I'm in a world of entities. Suddenly I woke up to the fact that all of these practices that I was doing with the Castaneda warrior work was courting entities, courting the world of entities. Energy reality is the world of entities. It is the world of the spirit. And I was courting it. And suddenly, it was like, terror. Why? Because I was completely unprepared. And there's a part of myself that I found hard to quantify because it's the part that has been leading me along the whole time. Immediately recognized that I needed to retreat because I was in a very, very dangerous situation. I'm hearing things, right? I'm hearing these patterns. I'm getting very, very paranoid and afraid. There's an existential lack of safety that I began to feel. And at the time, I had the liar attacking me. My so-called friends used that opportunity to attack me, And like it was like it was this manifestation of negativeness. So so I retreated. I withdrew and retreated. I left Vancouver. I quit the terrible business. I moved back to Vancouver. I put all the practices down, stopped eating mushrooms, stopped smoking any pot. I stopped playing music, in fact. I just stopped everything and hid behind shields in order to build myself up, right? So that's when Spirit knocked on my door. And it woke me up, terrified me because I was not ready. And now I'm going to put something in that I learned much later. This is about Anahata that I mentioned yesterday. Anahata is this chakra in your chest, and it's all about loving and creating, and it's the beginning of your spiritual connectedness. It's where your upward reaching meets the downward descending aspect of spiritual process, meets in the middle. Anahata. And the first experience is you begin to hear things. Anahata is Sanskrit for unstruck sound. And that means you begin hearing things. The world begins animating. In other words, the world becomes animating in a way that's outside of your conscious material reality. And Sadhguru says there's two things you need to approach Anahata. One is clarity of distinction, to know what's what, what's real and what's not, I suppose, or to recognize yourself and the other, and just distinction, clear, sober distinction. I'm using sober because that's Carlos Castaneda's term, sobriety, like you're not going to mistake things, you got a clearness in your mind, right? Number one. Number two, sweetness of emotion. I sing about sweetness of emotion all the time because I know it to be true. And in 2000, I had no sweetness of emotion for myself. I could love others. I could be affectionate towards others in a little minimal way. But the moment I began to feel it in myself, stop immediately, because I'm so awful, so worthless. It just was not allowable. God, stop, break, right? So as I'm having this encounter with Spirit, blew my fucking mind, terrified me beyond measure. I stopped feeling safe being on my own. I was terrified. I was paranoid. And so I retreated. I got away from that, came back to Victoria, and I got into family life. I met a woman and we got together, we made a baby, many complexities of life went on. Also, other employers in the bad business came and contacted me and drew me back into the business because I was so good at it. You know what I mean? Because helping, even in those days, working in that business, I was a helper to the boss, helper to make money, helper to all the people around me in the office. You know what I mean? Like I was enacting the best parts of myself, but in the very wrong milieu, in the wrong manner. So I'm now going to fast forward because all those years of the thousands there, like rich and complex, many experiences, many learning moments, but in a way, all of it was building me back to the encounter with Spirit knocking on my door. I had to be like, oh, I can't take it, sorry, retreated, right? 2013, I'd been through all sorts of upheaval and turmoil and hardship, and topics of other stories, really. But I decided in 2013 to rejoin The Lyre and The Lyre's company, and to begin working in Vancouver again. And it was almost like everything that I'd put on hold in 2000 and 2001 when I left Vancouver and returned to Victoria. All those things that were put on hold there, suddenly all came right back. Everything immediately happened, I landed in Vancouver, at that time, my daughter's mother was still alive. We were separated by this time, co-parenting week with me, week with her, right? So the week that my daughter was with me, I lived in Victoria, worked remotely. The week that she was with her mom, I go and live in Vancouver. Eventually in a rental that I like a little rental dive that was a lot of fun. But anyway, like I encountered all those sounds that terrified me, but I was different and I was ready. I was engaging with the lyre, but yet in a very different way. I wasn't being taken advantage of. I was like much more sure of myself without ever having touched the conditioned response. So again, everything was still shame, inner degradation, worthlessness, and all the ideas and thinking that fed that, right? The difference was, I was like, well, this is what life is. Okay, here we go. You know what I mean? So, I'm doing my best to accept this, because to accept this blighted reality. You know what I mean? Because the one thing I could never question was that terrible, terrible traumatic childhood conditioning. I just couldn't break it, right? Now, at the same time, when I got back there, I began playing music. Now, music again is a key thing, and my evolution of music as a musician is the topic of another of these, I suppose, these moments. But you see, when I was younger, I'm just gonna cursorily go over it. So, like, when I discovered music, I was immediately turned on, picked up instruments, began playing. It was about 88 or 89. I got out of high school, discovered music. I used to do a lot of drawing and art when I was a kid. The moment I discovered instruments and music, never drew again. It was all over. So, yeah, so 1988, 1989 is when I discovered instruments and began playing music. And then in my 20s, I became the ultimate jammer. I could jam like 8 hours and just be in bliss the whole time, And it was very much an unconscious process, and I loved the creation of it, So, playing set songs was kind of boring to me, but usually there was an opportunity for other musicians in the band to solo, and it would be like an improvisational time. That's when the magic would happen. And in the bands that I'd been in through my 20s, everyone was waiting for me to turn on, because I'm a singer, and music comes out of me. Everyone was waiting for me to turn on, but I could never turn on. The moment I began turning on for real, which is to say making it a real thing, stop. Not allowable. I'm a disgusting wretch, right? It had to be this secret fantasy, right? So jamming became this secret fantasy life, right? And I did play in bands that played in public, and I was in a cover band, and we became the house band at the Forge. But that was so boring. I quit the band actually when it was actually successful, because it was soul destroying to play only cover music and no improvisation for me, because there's no music in it, there's no energy in it, spirit wasn't in it for me, right? So in 2001, the experience of sounds was loosely connected, of course, to this musical side of my being, and escaping that was a key piece to my health, my mental health. And who knows, if I had a different disposition or whatever, maybe I would have become schizophrenic right there, you know what I mean? And just gone crazy and been paranoid and, had heard sounds and who knows what, right? There, but for the grace of God go I, because somehow I just kept on going, and I returned to the battlefield, if you will, the battlefield in 2013. And so by day, I would work in the lyre's office, and by night I would be on my own. But once or twice a week, I'll play music with a friend of mine. And he was the first Easter Island man that I met. Easter Island man is one of the poetic motifs I sing about. It's a kind of person. And of course, I was an Easter Island man too, but I could only see it in him at the time. Easter Island man is someone who is so frozen that they turn to stone, gazing out at the sea. I mean, there's a deep meaning in that image for me, because I've met many Easter Island men. And I'm sure there can be Easter Island women and Easter Island theys and whatnot, right? But as a man and in my relationships, amongst my comrades who were mostly men, it's a phenomenon I found in men, Easter Island man. An Easter Island man is someone who becomes emotionally paralyzed, frozen, fight, flight, freeze, right? I developed freeze because fighting, I learned in my very early teenage years was like, being aggressive, bad. Running away, pointless. So I just would freeze, right? And at that point, it's a metaphor, okay? But at that point, if you can think about those Easter Island statues, those great stone faces with those dark, shadowed eyes, they just sit there on the shore looking out to the sea. Ooh, there's something interesting about that. And for me, my imagination imagines that they're looking out into the dark sea of eternity. And through whatever cause inside of them, they froze and turned to stone. And that's the end of it. You just sit there gazing, turned to stone. And so, for myself, my feelings, I would freeze them out, clench, wince, recoil. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I froze out my feelings, because I couldn't feel them, because I was an insane, evil wretch deep down inside because of, the traumas of my childhood. And then over time, you just become frozen. You become paralyzed. You can't make decisions properly. You don't see things clearly, right? And certainly, this fellow that I played music with, he was the same way, very much that way. An Easter Island man, frozen inside, not able to live his life fully. And yet there's some kind of vanity when you're looking out into the eternal sea, the infinitude. It's like you're dazzled by it, and somehow not doing anything and freezing and becoming stone. I don't know. There's something in it. So anyway, I was playing music with the Easter Island man in the evenings, right? So immediately, all the things which have been the threshold guardians of my 2001 experience, right, in terms of dealing with the knock of the spirit, I passed through them. I wasn't being manipulated by the liar. The sounds didn't torment me anymore. I'd found a certain sweetness of emotion, which I actually found from being a dad. I found out I could be a loving person. You know what I mean? And during that process, I also was raising myself. While I was raising my daughter, I was bringing along the dark boy inside of me who was never raised or never learned a thing when I was a child. I raised myself while I was raising her in a funny way through those years. That's one of the things that went on. Sweetness of emotion, much more clarity of mind, and yet all existing within that brutalized, trauma-induced conditioned response, right? So my life had two halves. This day life of working in the fraudulent business, in the liar's office, and it was a very strange environment. And yet I say that, and it was full of people, and people all just coping with life the best that we could, right? And then at night I played this music, right? So at one point, early in 2013, I had a memory and an idea. I remembered at a certain point in time when I was in my 20s, I got a double wreath of skull beads with a beautiful, sort of burnt orange tassel at the end. And I used to wear this double wreath of skulls. It was one of my favorite adornments. I loved it. I loved it, In fact, one time someone said, Shiva? And I was like, I don't know. I just like it, right? This is my unconscious self, because Shiva is that which is not. As decades later, I can see that it was like a gesture towards something that was meaningful and yet unattainable from my blighted conditioned response place, right? So anyway, had this wreath of skull beads, loved the skull beads. And I wore them until one night out in the club. I was down there in the 90s. The funnest club to go to was called Scandals in downtown Victoria. It's now, it was a music store. I don't know. I think it's a a vintage store now. It's right beside the Odeon Theater down on Yates Street. That used to be called a Scandals nightclub in the 90s. Go-go dancers were on the speakers. It was alternative music. It was music out of the 80s. It was a lot of fun. And I had those beads on one night, and I was having a piss in the bathroom, and the string broke, and the beads just fell into the urinal on the floor, and that was the end of it, right? Many years later, 2013, I was like, oh, I really like those beads. I want something like that again. But I don't know if I want I don't know if I want like a necklace, maybe a bracelet, right? Yeah, I can get a bracelet. And then also, if it's got the double wreath, just like the skull beads were a double wreath around my wrist, right? I can also use it, as a kind of conversation fiddle piece, The Buddhists will sometimes have a bead bracelet that they use while they're conversing and dialoguing, right? And I was like, that can be that too, right? I want to do this, right? So in an interest to have a new adornment, I went to the bead store in Victoria. I got a bunch of skull beads. I made myself one. This isn't the one. This is a different one because that one broke, as the way they do, and I had to make a new one, right? This is the new one. And but anyway, I made it. And of course, unwittingly, I am opening the spirit up in my life because, and interestingly, there had two manifestations, right? What I found is that the beads had no place in the office. You know what I mean? Like people like, what's that? Why are you wearing skulls at the office, right? And it would be in the way, like I couldn't type properly and I couldn't like write things down, like it was like the beads were discordant with the day-to-day life that I was living. And of course they were, because that was the conditioned response life. This is what I need to do. I need to do this to support the people in my life. I need to do this, I'm too disgusting to do anything meaningful in my life. So I got to do this. And I didn't see what it was because it was the only thing that some useless piece of shit like me could do, right? But at night, without realizing it, I wore it to music. And so one night in particular, this is something that happened over time, but one night in particular, the Easter Island man and I were playing some music, and I just want to set the stage. He had a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in one of those West End high-rises. You ever been down to the West End in Vancouver? It is so beautiful, It's where the gay community lives. So it's a place of like freedom and pride in yourself, pride in your sexuality. It's a beautiful spot. Lots of restaurants and bars and little cafes and stuff going on. Plus, it's incredibly beautiful because English Bay is there and Stanley Park is there. It is beautiful. And he had this southwest-facing apartment on one of those towers that sort of overlooked English Bay and the ocean. It was stunning, this place. High up too, maybe 10th floor, something like that. Anyway, it was a delight going there. He lived there for many, many years. And at this time, I'd go there, we'd sometimes have a meal, get some sushi or something, and then we'd head upstairs, smoke a bunch of pot, and play some music, right? And at that time, for years, on and off, we'd played music together. And it was usually like acoustic guitar and singing cover songs, right? With sometimes a little improvisation, which was always that mystic tickle, you know what I mean? What I discovered right away as we played music in 2013 was that there was much more improvisation. Like I was drawn deeper into improvising with the guitar and improvising with my voice. One night, we had an incredible jam. It was just, all I can say is ecstasy is a very special feeling. And I feel nothing but thanks to Spirit that I get to have that. I don't know why. I'm just thankful that I have it, So one night we've been playing for hours. We just sitting there. I'm like, oh, it's so good. And he's like, what were you doing tonight, man? There was some really good things going on. I'm like, yeah, I know. He's like, what was that new thing you were doing? And I was like, what? I don't know what you mean. He's like, yeah, it was kind of a knocking or something. And I thought about it. And then I realized that what was going on was I was percussing with the beads against the body of the guitar. And it was creating a knocking sound in a rhythmic, percussive knocking sound that just added dimension to the music. I was still hearing things. I would hear whole, lots of space, lots of different sounds were going on. And when I'm in that zone, when I'm in the ecstasy place, I have no sense of time and space. I'm not in my body. Oftentimes it feels like I'm up near the ceiling or like outside, or I'm in a no place. All there is like this energy field of tone and vibration, right? And so at that point, whether it's the guitar or my voice, or suddenly the sound of these beads percussing against the guitar, that's all like the vibration domain, the energy domain of music. And it's just cleansing and ecstasy enlightening for me. And in that moment, though, when he drew my attention to it, right, he was actually saying how good it had sounded. I was like, oh, was it too loud? What do you mean? Because instantly, by drawing my attention to it, I came out of the trance, the secret fantasy, and into my day-to-day world of like, oh no, everything I do is awful. Everything I do is too loud, too invasive, too insane, too evil, right? So immediately and I'm going to use first attention and second attention. Music is very much a second attention process, which is to say, it's got nothing to do with the day-to-day mind. That's why it was a relief and a release from my conditioned response. But analyzing it, with the Easter Island Man, right, brought me immediately into the first attention, which is to say that the analytic process of my conditioned response. So immediately I was like, oh no, I'm doing something, it's destroying the music, it sounds terrible. And he's going, no, it's great, it was fantastic, it was a whole new level. He was positively reinforcing me, right? But being an Easter Island Man, both of us, all we could really do when we came out of the music was just reinforce our own trauma-induced shitty conditioning responses, right? But what happened is that over time, I started to deliberately wear the beads for music. Stopped wearing them at work because there's a dissonance there, of course. The beads had no place in my horrible first attention, shitty conditioning, schismatic side of life. And yet something is happening in the secret fantasy of music for me. So over 2013, I learned about my attention. So I learned, and what I learned is this. So I'd be playing music, and because he brought my attention to it, I was like paying attention to it now, right? And so I'd be playing, the good feelings would start coming, the music starts elating, right? I start slipping into the trance. I'm not sure how to call it, right? And then suddenly I'd hear that knocking, and my first reaction is like, uh-oh, right? The moment I'm aware of myself, uh-oh, negative, shithead, loser, you know what I mean? Like it's like, and that first attention, that rationalization, destroyed the music instantly. And if you don't understand that, it's subtle, you know what I mean? Creative space is subtle, You can't dominate it, you can't force it. It comes on its own, And it's like intimacy, You can't, as a man, like I can't force a woman to be intimate with me. All you can do is just be open and vulnerable, and that shared vulnerableness just opens, right? It's the same thing in music. It's the same, and it's not just music. I used to experience it in role-playing games as well. Get your friends together, you all agree on what you're doing, and you enter this magic energy space where you can be lost in a dreamscape together for many, many hours, And music is very much that way as well. The thing is, if you bring that rational, analytical mind into it, it immediately jars you out of it. Okay? So, and of course, for me, it was deeper than just being in the music. It was like it was like two different modes. You know what I mean? So the thing is that the beads were teaching me about being awake while I'm making music. Because up until Spirit knocked at my door, music was purely unconscious. It was this little fantasy, this little secret perversion that I did on my own. Secret perversion, okay? And I say that just to illustrate how negatively I felt about myself, how negatively I thought about the things that were good in my life. But now I'd come to the point where I was like, I can't explain it. Some part of me had turned on. I knew spirit was knocking at my door. I didn't have that conscious rationalization, but I could realize that, like, in this percussive effect in the music, I was learning how to wake up. And so at first, I'd wake up and the jam would stop and I'd be like, oh, sorry about that. I just started to hear the beats and stuff, right? But I began to realize that, like, the sound of the percussion began happening as the sacred resonance began ringing, as the vibration began happening. The beads percussed at that exact moment. As spirit descended, that is when the percussion would begin. And my learning was to wake up to that, because at that point I could then actively join it, create it, expand it, deliberately include things in it. By deliberate, not being rational. It's not the mode of the first attention. I could be in it in that way that it's like it's running the show, but you're also in command of it too. It's hard to explain, and I learned that all from the beats. 2013, like listening to how I'm doing it. You see what I mean? Like I was percussing, right? But it was unconscious. And as I became conscious of this unconscious thing that I was doing, like the knowledge began to fill in me and expand me. I began to know anahata, which is to be a creative being, to love and to give. Music became a giving thing. It was always a giving thing, but it was always unconscious and hidden in secret. It became, and it was still hidden in secret. I still lived this schismatic life. There was no union between these parts, right? But as I listened to the beads, I learned how to wake up in the second attention in music, which is to be an active agent of the spiritual vibration. Now, I haven't rehearsed these words that I'm using to describe this process because I've never said it to anyone, never said these words to anyone before. No one around me really has any interest in this, right? So I've got no one to talk to. I'm talking to you, the strangers on the internet, because I'm hoping that someone maybe feels the same way or has had a similar experience, something has happened to them. I don't know. I read it in Carlos Castaneda. I lived those truths. And then this crazy spiritual stuff began happening to me. Spirit came. This is spirit in my life, teaching me something. The beads taught me something. I must be insane, you see. Like, if I bring it into the old conditioned response, of course, I'm just an insane lunatic, as I always knew that I was, right? And yet, it was so nourishing. And the ecstasy was so real. And it was a positive influence on people around me. People enjoyed it. Everyone always enjoyed the music when we were in it, The Easter Island man who I played music with, he loved the sound of the percussion of the beads. And when it happened, it was next level. And the music got very good. It got so good that toward the end of 2013, I had another couple guys I played with in Victoria here, right? And I worked out a couple of sequences, and I took it to them. I said, will you guys make this music with me and take it to the public? And they both agreed to play with me. So here, like, suddenly I'm in this state of, like, realizing my music for real. And then my daughter's mom dies in a car accident, February of 2014, and I lost everything. That's another one of those spooky coincidences, right? But that put me into another phase, because the music never went away. What I learned from the beads never went away. If anything, it just expanded, And I met another friend of mine, the Velvet Monkey, and he had a studio. We began playing, and we immediately began getting higher in the music together, and I began practicing it, right? And always the two oppositions, right? The shitty day life of this is just what I need to do, you know what I mean? And actually, my daughter's mom getting killed in early 2014 meant that I was like, I doubled down on the work because like my daughter was having some health struggles. My dad's health was very bad. And so for all the best reasons, the heart reasons, caring for the ones I love, right, filtered through my shitty conditioning meant that I doubled down in the business. You know, I didn't notice the beads weren't in the business. They were a dissonant element in the business. I could not let go of that part because I in my broken, faulty thinking and all that I've talked about, it was like I had to do this. I just had to do this because I'm so shitty and this is a shitty world. You know what I mean? And I actually despaired very badly in those years. I despaired. That's when physical pain began to debilitate me because these two forces were working in my life. The spiritual enlightenment, expanding spiritual enlightenment, which is what the beads were teaching to me. All I had to do was listen to the beads and the ecstatic state would come to me. Very strange, very strange. And it wasn't the product of just playing music with the Easter Island man in Vancouver. It was an expansion across all the jam relationships I had. And then with the Velvet Monkey, we began playing all the time together here in Victoria, sometimes 3 days a week. And my music became like a call for help. Help me, help me, help me, right? Because the spirit had knocked, but I couldn't, as Carlos Castaneda said, like I had these shifts of the assemblage point, but not enough to transform my life. Again, I couldn't let go of that conditioned response. I could not break that continuity. I didn't have the strength. I couldn't do it on my own. Because what I can say to you is, and it's not me that says it, Castaneda says it, Don Juan says it, is that the spirit is the one who moves the assemblage point. And so here I am listening to the beads. In one part of my life, I am moving my assemblage point. And in those early days, my mantra was feel good, heal, and get higher, because it was very funkified, because I had very much a funk style of vocalizing at that point, which was just a mimicry and an affectation, right? As I've grown, I still have got a tendency to funky beats and being a funky soul singer. However, loving, healing, evolving, dreaming is my deeper and truer realization of that. And it's a mantra for me now. And it's a reality that I live. In those days, it was feel good, heal, and get higher. And how that happened is that the stress and the worry and the discomfort, the endless pressure of it being ill at ease, the pressure of being a single and only parent to my daughter, having no money, having no options. Like in 2013, when I began working with The Liar, what I was intending to do in my life, I thought of it as a pivot. I was going to take a step and then have my energies freed up in order to get into something different. Because the last time, in 2000 and 2001, when I worked with him, suddenly all these doors opened for me, right? But 12 years later, in my 40s, I made that step and no doors opened for me. I can remember in 2013, I talked to marketing companies in Vancouver. I tried to activate connections at the time, the Queen's Printer, which is a government agency here in Victoria, because the thing that I had mastered in this terrible business was print production. You know what I mean? It was mail order, right? Mail fraud. And so it was like, I knew all about the production. I was doing the production at that point, right? So I was trying to use that to say, well, maybe I can use my connections to get a job in the Queen's Printer. It's the King's Printer now, of course, because Queen Elizabeth died. But at the time, it was the Queen's Printer. But every place I looked, all the doors were closed. And it was sort of scary. But I was just, still a pivot. I still got a plan. It was my plan, right? And then I'm sorry, it was my daughter's name. I shouldn't have said that. But, my daughter's mother died. And immediately, like, I had no money, no options. I thought like, if I had left the business, She might have gone into foster care. I might have ended up in the shelter. I didn't know what to do. There was no recourse. I had nothing. So I doubled down into the business, which led me into much more problems. And yet, as I'm going to say in my next one tomorrow, led me to my liberation in this weird, paradoxical way. But the reason I'm rambling away here is because the beads taught me, the beads spoke to me, the beads sang to me, that the beads opened up higher dimensions of spiritual process in me. Sounds ludicrous. And I can say to you, I was doing the percussion myself, and yet it was unconscious. It was just happening. And when I woke up to it, this is what I'm talking about spirit. Spirit was in my life, making things happen. And if I was able to pay attention, which took many months of like being able to get control of my reactiveness, right? So that I could be in the music and not succumb to my first attention self, that self-destructive trauma conditioning, right? I learned to bypass that, and I got higher and better inside myself. And so when the pain of the stress and the pressure, I mean, I was being destroyed by stress and pressure in my day-to-day life. Like I was in pain. I'm developing problems in the sciatica. I had this osteitis pubis. I was like in pain all the time. I could hardly sit down. And I lost my sleep, actually. 2014, 2015, I lost my sleep. I was beginning to get insomnia. I couldn't sleep at night. I could fall asleep, but then I'd wake up to have a pee, and then I couldn't get to sleep the rest of the night. So I was experiencing sleeplessness. And yet, because of this increasing spiritual perspective that was inside of me, yes, still a fantasy, yes, still ashamed of it, and yet less so, right? When I'd lie awake at night, I'm like, what is the problem? And then I'd realize that I couldn't feel my body. This was a realization. I couldn't feel my body. And so when you're worried and stressed and your mind is spinning and running, right? Your body is your anchor. And if you can't feel your body, you can't stop your thoughts. That's very strange. And so as I lay there at night, I began to like wiggle my toes and like feel the comfort of the sheets against my skin. And I realized that this is when my mantra began. And it began because I was listening to the beads. It's crazy. But I love it. I just love it. This is why I love to tell you about it, because you need to find this yourself in whatever way you do. In my own life, there I am, sleepless, lying awake at night, and slowly but surely coming into my body. Because feeling good in your body is where it all begins. If you can't feel good in your body, something is wrong with you. Immediately work it out. Why am I not comfortable right now? What's going on? There is a trauma there. There's a trauma history there. You're going to find something emotional. You're going to find something that's attached to your ideas about yourself and your world. You're going to find something about your thinking. And the only way to break through that, you can't change thinking by thinking, but by coming into your body, by coming into your senses, the sensations of your body. You give yourself a release and a relief from that broken inner pattern. This I know. This is real. So my mantra at that time was feel good. Why am I not feeling good? You know? And I'm not saying, like, I'm telling you this now from my perspective now. Back then, I didn't have this conscious process. I was blindly stumbling in the dark, you know? I'd learned things because of the beads. The beads had taught me some things. Spirit had shown me some things. And it was starting to saturate into the other parts of my life. And it began by recovering my sleep. I recovered sleep by like wiggling my toes, feeling the sheets against my legs, feeling the rise and the fall of my breaths, with my stomach against the sheets, And over that time, I was able to regain my sleep. I mean, sometimes I would still wake up and be awake because I was always stressed and always under pressure and always worried, because it was like working in that business was unfulfilling and it wasn't good. And it was frightening to me because it was a world of people who were untrustworthy, and I was it was just uncertainty. It was not a path of heart. It was torment for me. It was hell. My day-to-day life was hell. I made the best of it because that's what I do. But at night I couldn't sleep. Pain was in my body, and that was when my healing journey, which began all the way back in 1991 when Spirit came into my life for the first time. This was when it became more active, so that I lived this day life in this shitty business, right? And in my free time, I began to actively heal myself little by little, I regained my sleep. I always was like working to heal my body and the pain that I was feeling. But then the moment I started feeling better, compulsive, addictive exercise, and I'd hurt myself again because I couldn't break out of it because I had body dysmorphia. In addition, there's so many dimensions of like that trauma, you know what I mean? So the knock of the Spirit and what the beads said, 2013, it began in 2000, but I had to retreat, and I retreated for 12 years. Look at these amounts of time I'm describing to you here. Like my life is like I've spent decades working this shit out. I don't know. It is it's mysterious. It is mysterious. When Spirit starts coming into your life becomes different, And so this phase of my life went all the way up to 2018. I could not break the conditioning on my own. I lived a life of two parts, Every time I thought that I was going to leave the business, I was confronted by like my daughter's health struggles, my dad's declining health. He began dying in 2017, actually. And it was like, I felt responsible for them. So every time I was going to say, okay, I'm going to leave now, and I need to cultivate music. I got to cultivate energy. I've got to be healing. These weren't actually conscious understandings. They were like a call, a seeking, an urge was in me to get out. And every time it rose up, it met the conditioned response. No, you are a responsibility to these people. You got to keep doing this. You can't let this go. This is what you need to do, right? And it was only the American Department of Justice that came and freed me in 2018. And that was the next manifestation of Spirit in my life, which is called the descent of the Spirit. It was the descent of the Spirit into my life, the point at which there was no turning back. It was also the event that broke the mirror of my self-reflection, broke that conditioned response in me. Now, that's going to be tomorrow. I'm not going to get into that today. This has been the knock of the Spirit. And the knock of the Spirit culminated in what the beads said. What the beads said. Oh my God. Nowadays when I play music, it's like hearing that percussion is just like, it's a summer breeze that comes over me. It is another tropical surf wave that comes and washes over me. Every time I hear the beads, it's just like, oh yeah, it's even better now. You know what I mean? Because I've come so far. Spirit has opened me up. It's opened me up. It's opened me up. It keeps opening me up. And the healing component that I went through was regaining my sleep, which was the beginning of feeling good in my body. Loving is feeling good, period. If you're not feeling good in this moment, that is something where healing is like rubbing the love in. I've said that many times before, you know what I mean? In my own life, it was 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017 that I was actively healing myself, actively healing myself. My music was a prayer and a begging for help. Help me, you know? And help did come. And it came, it came through the dark world of my conditioned response, because that had to be broken. And it was broken. Praise be. So, the knock of the Spirit, or what the bead said, something I learned from Carlos Castaneda, and which happened in my life for real. I'm saying this to you to show you that spiritual process is real. Whatever system you get attached to, whatever practice you do, what I can tell you is that the work works. The work works. Just do it. Don't just let it become an idea. Your life is where you realize your spiritual process. It can't be an idea. It can't be a hobby. It can't be a secret fantasy. It can be, but eventually it is going to push through and your life is going to be transformed. This is what spiritual process is. This is what doing the work is. In a Carlos Castaneda sense, it was the unbending intent of decades. It took decades for me. I probably will put someone off. Decades? Why do I want to put that kind of effort in? You know what I mean? Well, I can tell you, the life that I live now is so sweet, and so good. And I'm a helper. I'm a helper and a healer in the mental health and addictions field. I sleep well. I eat well. I do the work. I'm constantly evolving, loving, healing, evolving, dreaming. Look what I'm doing here. My discipline with you to be vulnerable, to ensure that I'm vulnerable every day, because the work works. It's not something that happens magically. It's not something that's outside of you. It doesn't exist in any system that externalizes. It is within you, and only you can do it. And I'm sharing this with you because I am doing the work in my own life. You are the one who has to do the work in your life. Only you can do it in your life. Only I could do it in my own life. And even then, I needed Spirit to come into my life. Hopefully, when Spirit comes into your life, you're not going to be such a broken creature as I was, who needs this kind of like shockingly profound, like total and complete upheaval, you know? That's what it took for me, because I couldn't let go. So I kept on asking. Spirit said, all right, this is it, my friend. And then bam, everything changed. And then all the work that I'd ever done came into the living moment. And suddenly it was up to me to truly live in 2018. And live I did. Because when it stops, when you wake up, that's your ticket. Wake up. Stay awake. I'd been working my whole life for it. And even though it was getting in trouble with the law, that was the final piece that I needed, which I'm going to talk about next time. It was enlightening. I don't know how else to put it. It's very peculiar. And but do the work. The work works. I'm starting to circle now because it's over, and I've said everything I'm going to say. You know what I mean? So yeah, there it is. That's. Whew. This is hard to talk about. It is hard to talk about. And I'm going to leave you with my intent. My intent is to engage you in the spiritual process. I want a dialogue of insight. I want to create a community of insight. And this is another piece of my insight today. So please tell me what your experience of the Spirit is. Tell me what your experience, what your insight tells you about it. You know, I want to know. If you got a question, or you think it's bullshit, you want to ask a question or point at something, please do so, because Any question is an opportunity to exercise insight. I encourage you to think about it. Just ponder what I've described to you and ponder what you're doing in your own life. Come and talk to me about it. I want to talk to you about it. So, be well. And next time, it's the descent of the Spirit and the breaking of the mirror of self-reflection. Until then, I'll see you later.